Hello, hello. Nicole, can you hear me? Can you put your thumb up if you can hear
Yes,
me? Right, are you happy
I can
with
hear
this
you.
layout for both sign or spotlight?
Just if we're both spotlight when we're swapping, as long as the deaf ACL user can see us, then I think we're fine.
This one's already. Dave Warren. Dave Warren.
I'm here. Do you want to do a sound check?
Brilliant. Looks like we've got a full house. Julie, do you want to come up? We'll make a start. I think one of the things that we're really keen to do today, if we possibly can, is finish on time, not just because they'll be throwing us out or because we've had enough or anything like that, but just because we know people have to get away and there's lots of things going on. People have got trains to catch and stuff like that. So I think we'll make a start. So welcome to this session. This afternoon's session is called All Change. So if you're expecting to be somewhere else, now's the time to move. Please don't leave it another couple of minutes because we'll all know that you're going. And welcome as well if you're joining us online. You'll be familiar now with the format of these kind of things from the day. We're going to have, we've got 4 speakers. Each speaker is going to speak for, sort of 5-10 minutes, perhaps a little bit longer, about their experience of the topic. And then after that, there'll be a chance to ask questions. We can take questions from online attendees in the chat and the Q&A, or you can just put your hand up in the room here and we'll take a question as well. So the subject of this session, just as with all the other things that we've been doing today, it's all been about how to get the best transitions for a young person. It's the young person absolutely at the center of that. But it's also recognizing the fact that things are changing, not just for them, it's changing for their families, it's changing for their parents, it's changing for people who are around them as well. And I think, what we've got with us today, we've got it's expert speakers really, because you'll have, Julie, I'm sure you introduced yourself earlier on. Julie, you will have seen during the day, Julie's the parent of Ryan, who's the divergent influencer, and she's passionate about having young people's voices right at the center of their own transitions experience. Online, we've got Claire, who's going to tell us something about, from a young person's perspective, a young adult's perspective, of how it feels to be parented when you're an adult and when that relationship is changing, because of course it's very different from parenting a child with additional support needs to being parented as a young adult. And then we've also got with us Dave. Hello, Dave, who, if any of you were in the Dare to Dream session this morning, you will have seen Dave's son, Alexander, who runs his own business, AJP Dreams. And Dave joins us at events when we're doing sort of presentations and training and things like that as well, quite often to give a parent's perspective on the whole process. So I did say we've got 4 speakers. Actually, the first of them, I'm afraid, was really hoping to join us right up until the last minute, but it's the nature of the game as a parent and as a carer that she is not available to come along today. She just couldn't manage it. So what she has done, she's provided us with a video of what she was intending to say. And because it's been thrown together at the last minute, it's not very polished. You will see that. You'll see where bits have been kind of shoehorned in. But I think it's really important that you get to hear what she would have said had she been here. So we're going to start off with hearing from Wendy White, and then we'll go through the other speakers in turn. So James, would you start Wendy's video for us, please?
I'm really sorry that I can't be with you in person, but that is because of the current crisis in my caring roles. I have 2 parents who are in their 90s, and my mum has been very unwell since Christmas, been sort of requiring increasing care at home. And then last week she was rushed into hospital with a severe pneumonia, and she's still there in the Royal. So my daughter left school a number of years ago. She's now 26, she'll be 27 this year, and she's been living at home with me and my husband. So Naomi has a severe learning disability and is also on the autistic spectrum and has ADHD. So she's quite a handful, and really does require a lot of hands-on support in order to make life work. Right. Well, I think at this point I should explain a little bit about Naomi and her ability to understand, because I think there's going to be a whole range of people attending this conference, both carers and individuals needing help, and there's a whole spectrum of ability and understanding. So my husband and I have guardianship for Naomi, both welfare and financial guardianship, and that rather unusually was granted to us to be guardians for life. So I think that just reflects the level of her disability and the permanence of her disability. And I know a lot of young people here at the conference will be dead keen to get away from being tied to the apron strings and move off on their own and become independent. And that's something that Naomi on her own has no aspirations for at all, because that just doesn't enter into her thinking. Her involvement in decision making for her future and choosing where she's going to live and how she's going to live is very different from a lot of other people in this room. And so therefore we have done a lot more deciding and guiding for her, and although we're giving her choice when we can, a lot of the serious decision making just has to be up to us, because that's not her in her sort of capability. So a lot of the way in which I describe the transition will be quite different, and maybe a bit shocking for some of you who think, well, for goodness sake, fancy your parents deciding all that for it. I want to decide this for myself. Well, that's great for those of you that can, but that's not the level that Naomi's at. Her sort of support has changed since the pandemic. Her day centre initially shut because of lockdown, and then very slowly during 2020 the care built up again, so that she now receives daily care from Monday to Friday, but the carers visit the house rather than her going to the day centre, because the day centre still isn't fully open. It's had some good and bad aspects, because Naomi worries about being in a room full of people who might potentially be noisy. So she is, although she's very sociable, she's reluctant to actually go into rooms full of people. So in some ways it's actually suited her very well to be looked after at home, but she is becoming very isolated and she's not getting to mix very much with her peers. So that is an issue. The other issue we've had to grapple with is that at the beginning of lockdown, her respite facilities shut down, and what we were told was that there was plenty of other respite out there available for all the people, of the 50 odd people who'd used those respite services, and in actual fact that hasn't proved to be the case. Just before lockdown, we had been having discussions with her day centre about her transitioning to living with support out with the family home, and what we had hoped for and been hoping for the last 5 or 6 years was that she would be able to go and live in a Camp Hill community, because since she is so sociable, we thought, and she's used to living in a family atmosphere, we thought that would be the best thing that would most closely match to what she was used to at home. However, Camp Hill communities are very popular, and they're also quite limited in the numbers of people they can take. So last year we felt we really ought to be taking matters into our own hands and trying to find a plan B. None of the places that we were shown we felt very comfortable about. They were either near very busy roads and in very noisy areas where we felt Naomi wouldn't be safe and wouldn't thrive, or we just didn't really feel comfortable. And that was a sort of, they were going to allow her to live the sort of life that we wanted her to live. So anyway, we've managed to get this house for Naomi, and we're in the process of painting it, and my husband's putting floors down, and I'm making cushion covers, and we're just getting it all sort of ship shape, so that hopefully once a team of carers have been recruited, she'll be able to move in there, hopefully with another young person with a disability who she could get on with. So that all does sound very hopeful, and the social worker that we have at the moment is hopeful that she'll be able to put the funding together that will allow this to happen. It has been a very long and exhausting process, and when I was chatting about this to my husband earlier, he was commenting that this latest transition we're doing feels very different from the transition we did from school to adult services. Looking back, it felt as if we did get an awful lot more support, and there were an awful lot more choices than has happened this time around. This time we feel as if we've been very much on our own, as if it's been up to us to really go delving and find out what's out there. It's been very hard to find that sort of information, and when we finally found we were getting some answers, and we thought we'd had some ideas, and we were all set to get Naomi into doing some day service, some days at a Camp Hill community as a day visitor, and then looking at applications for places at Camp Hill communities. We thought that this was very hopeful, and then it was blocked by our social worker at the time, who, for not terribly helpful reasons, felt that they weren't in Naomi's best interests, which we strongly disagreed with, and everybody who knew Naomi disagreed with as well. So it does feel as if it's been very much an uphill battle, and as if the sort of help and the advice that we would have liked to have had wasn't really there in any great quantities. And then in terms of day services as well, Naomi's current day service was not really suiting her needs, really, by the end of 2019. And the service providers were also in agreement that it wasn't meeting Naomi's needs, and she needed to go somewhere that's more stimulating and allow her to really flourish and meet her potential. And although it was widely agreed that that was the case, nobody seems to have been able to find or suggest anything better. So it does feel as if we're sort of floundering around in in a bit of a black hole where there isn't an awful lot of choice as to what's available, and then we just have to hope that the funding is going to be there, and of course that's just a whole load more difficult than it was before. And we're fortunate to have had a bit of help from other members of the family in order to be able to get a mortgage and purchase a house, which a lot of people wouldn't be able to do. So we feel as if we've done our bit to sort of help with the council funding of all this sort of stuff. But obviously there's still going to be a lot more, funding sort of things that need to be sorted out. So that's that. And then of course, I'm at that time of life where you're sort of pulled in two generational directions for caring. So not only have we got Naomi at home full time, and my elderly parents have become increasingly frail and ill over the last few years, and they live locally, and they have a care package to keep them in their own home. But then during the pandemic, that sort of melted away. So my sister and I were sharing a lot of the care there. And so it just feels as if, there aren't enough hours in the day. And quite frankly, I've just had enough of caring. I'm just absolutely exhausted, and I just want it to stop now. And actually, I want to be in the position where there's a care package sorted out where I'm not an essential part of the service. I want to be able to spend lots of time with my daughter and a good bit of time with my parents. But if I needed to go away on holiday or do a long distance cycle ride, then the whole system doesn't collapse because I'm not there. And that seems to be a very difficult thing to achieve. And it also does, with the best in the world, it does then start to make you resentful, and then you actually, it's actually very hard to be genuinely have good feelings towards your elderly parents, and sometimes to your daughter as well, because it just feels too much like hard work, and it feels just like a duty and not necessarily like something that you really want to do anymore. And that's not a nice position to be in. But that's what happens when you've just been overloaded for too long, and you just get really tired. So
So as I said, that was thrown together very quickly, but I thought it was really important that we actually heard what Wendy had to say, because she was so honest about, you know, her love for her parents, her love for her daughter. That was without question. But the fact that she's being pulled in so many ways, and it's been going on for so long. And, you know, as she said herself, she's just exhausted. And I think that's something that, you know, as a context for what it means to be a parent and a carer of a young adult, if you're in that situation, which some of you will be, then it can be very challenging. And I think it's really important for our own mental health, as Wendy has done, you know, to kind of recognize that, acknowledge it, and talk to people about it, and let people know that this is how it is for you, because that's one of the things that helps people to keep going. The other thing that might well come up in some of the other talks in a moment, around services, around the level of support for people once their young person has moved beyond school age. And if you're familiar with the Principles of Good Transitions, which ARC Scotland publishes, I think it's Principle 6, that parents and carers need support too through the transition process and on into adulthood. And that's because we're depending on them so much to be that support for their young person and to plug the gaps and to keep things ticking over. So I'm not going to talk any longer. We're going to hear from the parent and, well, the parents and the young person who's joined us. But Dave, I'm going to come to you first, if you wouldn't mind. What were you wanting to share with us today about your experience of parenting and about particularly being a dad to Alexander?
Okay. Alexander's now in his early 30s, but I remember times, I can feel Wendy's pain there, because I remember times when Elizabeth, you know, had pretty bad times, you know, and sort of breakdowns almost just from the stress of looking after a very sick baby. Anyway, I'll get on to what I was going to say. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dave Warren. Tracy asked me to talk about the experiences my wife and I had as parents and carers. First of all, I'll give you a bit of background, and the main thing then I'll talk about is the transition from school to working life to independence. And we're a bit further down that journey. Alexander's in his early 30s now. Some of you might have seen Alexander's talk this morning. We call him Aki, as does Tracy, I notice. I'd like to do a quick recap on where we came from, because often people can't believe when they meet Aki today what he's been through. He was desperately ill at birth, and he spent 15 months in intensive care. During that time, we were told he wouldn't live. You know, sometimes we expected him to die that night. Sometimes we expected him to, you know, he won't last 2 days, pretty tough times. When he came home, he still had a tracheostomy, and at that time that needed 24-hour care. So we actually had a mattress. So every time he stopped breathing, this alarm went off, and we had to be prepared to resuscitate him within 30 seconds. Most of the time he would roll off the mattress and we'd just leap into sort of crash mode, as you see in A&E programs, only to find that he just moved off his mattress or he's turned over in bed. And my wife was the main part of that for 5 years. And then the tracheostomy was reversed and all this, but he had lots of problems, medical problems, right through to his early teens. We are lucky in some ways because my wife decided to give up her job to care for Aki. And I wasn't brilliantly well paid, but with cuts and things like this, we said we can survive that. I do not know how a single parent or, you know, a couple on lower income could possibly do that, because you've got financial worries as well. We had financial worries, but not the sort of extent of some people. By his mid-teens, things seemed to be settling down, and we're thinking, oh, this is quite good. His health was manageable. The system was looking after his schooling, and we were looking after him at home. But the big worry was the future. And when you kids get to 14, 15, you're thinking, oh my gosh, what's the next step? And we were trying to imagine what Alexander could possibly do in the future. We suggested things to Aki, and he always rejected them outright. Don't want to do that. And he would suggest things to us, and we felt they were completely unrealistic. One of his favorites was he wanted to be an actor. And to us, the idea seemed impossible. To put a background, he had, whilst he was in intensive care, he was on a ventilator and he had all these tubes down his throat. So it damaged his vocal cords. So he only has one working vocal cord. He lost the ability to use his tongue. So his speech was basically incoherent. Even as a father, I couldn't understand him. I'd say, I'd say to my wife, what did he say, Elizabeth? And that was at 14, 15 sometimes. He had very low self-esteem. He always, whenever he was in public, he'd sort of hunch over and look down, and you think, how could this person possibly be an actor? Then everything changed in our life for the better, and you just not believe this. A charity called the Edinburgh Development Group approached the school, and it was did an offer to do something called a person-centred plan for students in their final year. For Aki, my wife, and I, it was a revelation. Aki was deciding what he wanted to do and looking for help on how to get there. The person-centred plan structured Alexander's thinking and also allowed us to think of how we could possibly get there. And Steve and all the team from Edinburgh Development Group were helping us to talk through those things and saying, these things may be possible, are possible. And in hindsight, I realized we were treating Alexander completely different from his older brother. His older brother had decided what he wanted to do in life, and I'll come to that later, really, and he just told us. Whereas with Aki, we were deciding what to do for Aki, and it was the wrong thing, we realize now. Once we'd done a person-centered plan, we started looking at how can we work to achieve Alexander's goals. And the first one was, he wants to travel independently. Now, he was getting buses to college, and one day he decided to cancel his taxi. And we said, there was a few words in our house, but my wife went on the bus with him about 20 times. We taught him how to speak clearly, to say Princess Street and all this, and eventually did a first bus ride to college on his own, changing buses in Princess Street. And he had a mobile phone, so he could tell us. But we were so worried that first day. But we got the phone call, I'm at Princess Street, I've caught the next bus, and that all went well. We've had a few things like missed stops when he used to pick up the Metro and read the sports page. And then he'd ring us and say, oh, I've ended up here, how do I get to college? And we'd somehow work out a route and give him directions. But that's all part of growing up and living. He's now quite happy jumping on the bus and going into town city centre. He goes to Princess Street all the time. He has masses of freedom. Right, that was the travel one. Another one was the one we thought was impossible, was mainstream drama course at Fife College. And he'd had a few misstarts with college, but he, hold it, I've lost my wording here, yes. It greatly helped him with his self-esteem, clarity of speech, and personal well-being. He passed a mainstream course. And as I said, we would have thought that impossible 6 years earlier. And to sit there as parents and see him on stage, with confidence and projecting his voice and all that stuff. And in fact, being the person he's supposed to be on stage, not himself, was another brilliant thing. For us, it was very emotional. And as I say, he passed a mainstream course. And he used that all the time. Those that saw him this morning, he speaks quite clearly now and he does the presentations well, much better than me. As I said, he's now in his early 30s. He lives at home with us, but that's from choice rather than necessity. We don't see him ourselves as carers anymore, although he sometimes asks for our help. But similarly, we'll ask for his help. And he certainly pulls his weight in the household. He's sometimes left his home at weekends, and he's gone to stay with friends in Spain, and he regularly visits his brother in Nottingham on the train. he could live in a flat on his own with a little assistance, and our aim is over the next 10 years, you know, to facilitate that. But that's not something we're going to rush into. So that's where we are. Now, Tracy said, I thought, well, what do you want me to talk about, Tracy? And she said, well, it'd be nice if you could answer some of these questions. And I've cheated now. I'm just going to read out the questions and answer them. First question was, how do parents make sure they're not being overprotective whilst keeping someone safe? I think the person-centered plan approach allows him to express what he wants to do. And if you can be open and he sees he's on your side, he sees you as supporting him. You know, we've had anxious moments like that first bus ride. Having a mobile phone where he feels we're always on the end of that and there to help him, not to stop him, has been a huge help. Being overprotective can be a big mistake. Some young people, and we know them, I'm afraid, have just relied on their carers doing everything for them, and they're in their mid-30s and they're still expecting that. And you think, how, you know, when their parents are no longer there, what's going to happen? Another side, of course, is where you get the young people who know their parents are being overprotective and they think, well, they wouldn't let me do that, so I'm not going to tell them about it. So I said to Alexander, you could tell us about everything and I'll try my very best to do it safely. And that's the deal we have. What should life be like as a role or young carer for young adults? This is a quick question, quick answer. Our relationship with Aki has changed from a carer to best friend. And we all help each other if we need to. How can parents carers make sure to look after themselves and their own health being? Really difficult one. Sorry, nasty one, Tracy. We couldn't, as parents, we could never be happy if Alexander wasn't enjoying life. So in some ways, when we care for Alexander, we're meeting his needs. We're actually making ourselves happy. And another point in our life is when he makes those things like that drama course success, you know, it's momentous for us, or even more so than it is for Alexander. And the last one is, how do you balance some responsibilities, family members, employment, having your own life? When Aki was young, we had a family rule that Sunday was always spent with his older brother, or he was the priority. Having seen Alexander desperately ill, and we would often, his older brother would often see him in hospital, he never complained. And we found the doctors and nurses are most immensely supportive of this young family, if you like, with children as well as someone who was ill. In fact, so much so that our older son decided he wanted to be a doctor when he was about 7. We asked him the other day, you know, did he ever feel that he was neglected? He said, absolutely not. You know, he said, you know, he felt he was included in that whole community. In fact, quite honest, I'm sorry, there were times when my wife was crying about Alexander's health, and his older brother, 7 or 8 or 9 years old, would come up to my wife and say, it's all right, mummy, you know, Alexander's going to get better. And he was right. In my company, they understood the situation. They gave me extra time off when I needed it, but then I always repaid them with overtime, and it was never an issue. My wife's parents sort of mucked in and did help willingly. And now for my wife and I, we have our own life, but we have a good friend that lives in the same house with us, but he's sometimes there and he's sometimes not. The pandemic has thrown us all a bit together, but you know, we're not complaining about that. Alexander, he was supposed to come in at the last minute because I was going to, though some of you might have seen him this morning, and I can tell you everything I've said. You move this side, Aki. We spoke this morning, and I went through my talk, so he was keeping me honest and says, that's how I remember it, Dad. And I'd like to make a special thank you for Lou for doing sign language. I've never had sign language.
Is that right? Is it? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I've never said anything that was so worthy of having sign language with it before.
It's brilliant.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. That was great. And I think there's so much in that, isn't there, about the way that the relationship changes. Of course it changes. It has to change because someone isn't a child anymore. Parents are getting older. It has to change, but it doesn't go away. And it's navigating how that works, I think, is something that maybe we'll have a bit of discussion around when we come to the questions. Claire, I can't see you on the monitor in front of me, so I'm going to turn around. I'm sorry. Claire, I'm going to come to you next because I know that you have got something particular that you want to say around the idea of how your parents interact with you and the things they have to do for you at the moment. And of course, you're the young person who's kind of on the receiving end of parenting. What's that like, and how's that for you now that you're a young adult?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Claire and I'm 27 now. But when I was born with congenital muscular dystrophy, and I was in hospital for a little while when I was born. My health, growing up as a young child, I was fairly similar to my peers. I just wasn't able to walk. It wasn't until I was about 8 years old, my health started to deteriorate, and I was in hospital for, I can't actually remember, but about 5 months maybe in total. So my parents had to navigate around that. Luckily, at first I was in Nine Wells in Dundee, which is where I live. So it wasn't too difficult in that sense. But growing up, my mum was my main carer. She didn't work when I was young, so she was always on hand during the day when I needed her. I have a younger brother, so his needs needed to be met as well. So I remember being in hospital, my mum would be with me during the day, and my dad would come in the evening. But unfortunately, my health deteriorated more, and I needed to move to York Hill Hospital in Glasgow, which was quite hard for myself and my family because I was away from my daily life. I was in hospital for about 3 months with my mum and just seeing my dad, brother, grandparents, etc. At the weekends. But my mum was always on hand with my care. She stayed with me at York Hill, but also before I moved there, and I was still in Nine Wells, I was able to go to school during the day. I've always been in mainstream education, so primary school. I had to wear oxygen during the day, and still weren't able to accommodate those care needs. So my mum had to be on hand at school with me all day in case I needed her. So I was really reliant on my parents growing up, but as I became a teenager, I wanted to have some independence away from them. And I can't remember when my transition journey began. I know when I was 13, I got some social care hours. So I had someone go to shopping with me, cinema, etc. But I always remember in social work meetings, I would always say, I want to be independent. I want to be an independent young lady. And they would always see that as, oh, I don't need help then. But my version of independence was away from my parents. I know that I need help, and just now I've got 24-hour terror. So that is needed due to my medical conditions and the pure weakness in my arms and the inability to walk. But it's really difficult during the transition, not just for me, but for my parents. As I became a teenager as well, I was lifted to move around, and I became too heavy for my mum to lift. She would get sore backs. So then my dad became my main carer. So social work meetings, going back to then, they were really difficult. Myself, my mum would come out in tears sometimes. My dad would get angry in the meetings just because we didn't feel we were being listened to. I wanted to go to university. That was always my dream, and my parents supported me in that. But day centres were the only option that were getting suggested. So my parents started to worry because when I moved to high school, my mum started working again. So she wasn't available during the day to care for me when I left high school. My dad works full time as well. And they were worrying that would they have to give up their job. Because if I can't go to university, if I don't get the care package that I need, I still need carers. I still need someone with me. But luckily, about a 2-year battle, it feels like we're still battling sometimes. I got the care support that I needed. I went to university and I graduated 4 years later. But if I didn't go to university, I think we would have struggled. SAS were a great company, or however they perceive themselves, in supporting me through university, supporting me with the care that I need. But I was still 19 years old at university, and I still didn't have a care package in place. I had social care, where I had someone with me at university, supporting me with my lectures, sometimes going into town shopping after a lecture or two, but I didn't have the personal care that I needed. And being 19 years old and your dad doing your personal care for you, it was very difficult. It was a hard time for me. I luckily had chas that were available, and I would go there for respite, but that's the only time that I had away from my parents. We were looking into care and slowly getting there, but unfortunately I broke my leg as my dad was lifting me one time, and I obviously had to get a cast on it. I went to Rachel House, which is run by Chaz, for some respite, but I refused to get lifted again. I then moved to a respite closer to home, where there was the hoist facilities available, but I wouldn't go home until there was a hoist in my home and there was carers in place to provide that care. So looking back, they always say bad times lead to good times, or one door closes, another door opens. So breaking my leg opened a door to me and opened the care that I needed to live my life. I lived with my parents until I was 26. I recently, just over a year, moved out into my own flat, just 10 minutes away from my parents, but still a good distance to have my social independence. And I live here with 24-hour care and my puppy Sheldon, who some of you may have heard earlier in the background, hopefully still sleeping just now. But it's been a hard journey, not just for myself, but for my parents, for my brother. I mean, he was young, he's 2 years younger than me, but hearing those conversations during his teenage years and worrying, would he have to help look after me as we got older as well? And those concerns do still creep up. I've been living here, as I said, just over a year. My parents, they were hovering at first, but they gave me my space to settle in. But at the end of last year, things just started to get a bit on top of me again. Some people who have a care provider or caring staff know the difficulties that come up sometimes. And recently it feels like it's just one thing after the other. So my parents, I don't let them do any of my personal care now. They are my parents, but they are having to just now pick up the pieces. Unfortunately, today I had a carer phone in sick and my dad's having to sleep over at my flat tonight. So those care situations still arise, and it's just finding the balance of them. My parents are always there for support, and my health has started to deteriorate over the last couple of years. I always went to medical appointments by myself, but now I've been asking them for more support again, just because you've got to listen to yourself and listen to the situation in your life and ask for that help when it can be provided. So yeah, I'd say our caring roles for them have changed. They don't personally care for me now, but they're still there to support me. They've always been there to support me, to make sure my voice is heard, and they'll do that until they're able to. So yeah, and as well, it's not just parents, it's brothers, it's friends, my grandparents when they were here, they helped look after me as well. And it's just having that good support base that you need to live your life. So yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Claire. And I think, you know, there's so many threads starting to come through what people are saying, and it's things around you know, the support that you need, the lack of services and the lack of support for the young people and also for parents and carers. There's something there, Claire, you were saying about the appropriateness of boundaries. You know, what should the parent be continued to be expected to provide when it's maybe not appropriate? Perhaps they're not the right person for that. Wendy mentioned, I was just going to come to you, Julie. Wendy mentioned that thing about wanting to be. She wants to spend time with her daughter as a parent. She wants to spend time with her parents as a daughter while she still has them. So, you know, how do we manage that? And what happens when so much responsibility or there's such a central part of the package that the package falls apart? So Claire, if somebody phones in sick, it's her parents who step up and take that responsibility. Supposing her parents weren't there or couldn't do it. You know, it's that kind of thing that makes you think, well, actually, as part of this, looking at transitions, we've got to be having parents and families and the bigger picture included in there as well. So Julie, I'm going to hand over to you. You've got some slides. I think they're up on the board there. That's fine. I know that we started just a little bit late, but we're going to keep on running. We've still got the airtime, so go ahead. Take whatever time you want.
Thank you, Tracy. So, change. Yeah. I found myself, so Ryan, when he was leaving school, in the transition stage, what we ought to have had and what we actually had was very different. And my role certainly changed. When Ryan was in primary school, I had to put a career of 17 years on hold because it became quite apparent that getting phone calls on a daily basis and working and going to pick him up from school when you got a phone call at short notice was not going to work out. So my hope was that having given that up, to support Ryan and care for him through education when he was moving on to adult life within education, that I would then have some of my independence back and he was maybe going to gain some independence. So if we could have the second slide. So this is who we should have had, and all these boxes should be ticked green because it's about all working together, and we have legislation, we have fantastic principles there, and then if everyone followed those, we would have been looking at Ryan in the centre, and family, myself, my partner, health and social care, education, legal, and his onward destination. Yeah, we'd all have been planned out with it. Ryan being able to see, this is my transition plan and this is where I'm going. But that wasn't the case. Yeah, we knew he was going on to college, but we didn't have a lot of control. And when I say control, that's from the point of view of, and that's Ryan uses those words because he felt that other people were controlling where he was going. He had no control. They thought they knew what he wanted, and we were, although you're allowed to go along to reviews, you're invited to reviews, but when you're at those reviews in real life, what it was, well, you don't get to speak to the college until after your young person's there. And it looks very good, but we found around a week or so after he left school, we contacted social workers and said, okay, so what about transport? He's been taken to school because that's what he needs, and he liked that independence because for years he'd had to have me taken, so he was looking forward to not having to go back the way, and instead that's exactly what happened. So I had to pick up the pieces, and that was really difficult for Ryan because he felt as though his independence was being taken away. When he was in college, again, it was, we think this is the best course for him, so they put him on an admin course, and he hated it, but it actually changed our relationship because once again, he couldn't understand why no one was listening. So his mental health was suffering. He had no support from health and social care, and it was a battle. It was a real battle to get his voice heard. And picking up from Pam said today, 23 years ago, well, Ryan left school some 6 years ago, and he had a 2-year battle, and I think that's really quite sad that all those years later that was happening, but it's still happening. And some parent carers are not even having their voice heard. They can't even, they knock on the door and the door's closed to them. So it's been a lot of work for Ryan, and yeah, we've been lucky because we did have the guardianship, so we asked for that seat at the table. But where do we go? We rely on other organisations to support us. You tap on the door, there's a lot of doors that are not open, and it comes down to, you take the legislation that ARC have, but then you speak to other parent carers. You learn a lot from other parent carers because that's the only way it's going to work, and it shouldn't. We've heard today about, there's principles there. We've heard how things need to change, but we've been hearing the same things for years. And for me, as a parent carer, I think it's really important that our mental health is protected, our young people's mental health are protected by actually working in advance, listening to them, because many of us have more than one caring role. But how can we make it change? You know, it's for me, it has to start today by listening and taking lots forward from today, because nothing is going to change unless everyone who's come along here and the people who've joined us online listen to what the young people have to say, and we all work together, because I don't want to be that my son feels his independence as he's getting older has been taken away from him. And we listen to all the young people today, and I think they've got really important messages. So for me, it's about accepting life's going to change, but driving forward with them. And the aim should be to give our young people more independence, because as they get more independence as people and as carers, but we are people, we are entitled to have a life as well, and not be that we end up with our health suffering terribly, and that happens much too often.
Lovely. Thank you, Julie. Really nicely put. So we have got about, I think, 5 to 10 minutes in this session. And there's a lot there. I think some people in the room might actually have experiences that, you know, sort of you've shared experiences like that. Others of you may be working to support young people, but, you know, how much connection do you have with the parents? How do you do that? How do you involve the parents in that transition? I don't know if we have any questions. If anybody in the room wants to ask any questions, it could be to any one of the people who've spoken, or it could be to all 3 of them. It's over to you, and online as well if you want to put any questions in the chat. Yes, I'll tell you what, I'll get another microphone. Yes, what do you want to ask?
Hi, I'm a social worker and I work with young people at the stage of transition. What a lot of experiences I can relate to. There was discussion about Athy travelling independently. That's something that I'm working with a lot of families, and there's a lot of anxiety. It's great to hear that technology can support them, but what can I do as a worker to try and reassure parents and families that there's young people who feel able to do this? I did a lot of young people consultations recently, like your themes about parents being anxious. I'm a parent, I understand that, but also young people being very positive and looking forward to what is out there. It's about how do I, as a social worker, support families to feel that they can take that risk.
Okay, did you hear that? Did everybody hear that okay? Yeah? So yes, how can other people who are not the family, particularly perhaps social workers and professionals, how can they help families who are a little bit reluctant to take the risk be prepared to give their young people a little bit more independence? Let me see. Julie, I'm going to come to you first, and then I'll ask you, Dave, okay? And then Claire, I'll come to you then.
I think it's about looking at each one individually, listening to the young person, listening to the family, and accepting it. So for some young people, it may be, yep, as Aki did, it may be getting on that bus. For some other young people, there can be a lot of sensory issues, and it is about working out, is that a barrier? I know with Brian, we tried to use the train, and he actually wrote a blog, and I was really quite taken aback, even as his mum, and knowing him so well. When I was typing it, you know, I was doing scribe for him, and it's actually on the ILF Transition Fund website, and he described getting on the train. He talked about sensory overload, and what he actually said was basically when By the time we got into town, it felt like getting off, there was a tsunami of people. And when he got to the door of the college, he was exhausted. And we've tried many times, and so the way for him personally is learning to drive with the support of the transition fund. But I think it's very much, you know, making sure that you listen, everybody listens, and look for, okay, what could be the barriers? How do we help to break them down? How do we help to put support in place? So it is very much a very individual rather than across the board. Yeah.
Thank you. Dave, how about you? Because you've had that issue around transport as well, obviously, as you were saying. What can give parents confidence to be able to let go and to let their young people try these things?
This is, Alexander often talks about this at length, and it's the thing that everyone wants to come back to him about, and we get lots of conversations. To give you a perspective, Alexander didn't understand maps. He still doesn't. He can't read place names easily, and he doesn't understand money. So I think it's stepping stones. The first thing was that he would ride on the bus with my wife, but he didn't look around. And we said, okay, you have to look around now. And, you know, you have to do these things. And then eventually Elizabeth went with him and he was handing over the money. We used to separate out the money. So this is your fare. Here's you spending the money. But if you like, Elizabeth was with him, but she saw, he knew what bus to get on, how much money to give, how to step off. And buses, actual facts, are the easier one because the bus drivers are amazingly helpful. You know, they'll see a young person struggling, and we've always had massive support. So I suppose the other thing that we've done, and we've offered this to young people who've heard Alexander's talk and say, oh, I'd like my son to be able to do this, is get a friend to be at the other end. So, you know, make sure someone's getting on, make sure someone's getting off. Another one is, look how long it takes for the bus to get to the new bus stop, and then send them a message saying, look for your bus stop now. You know, all these little tricks. And I think if you can show them all those little steps, then you know, it gradually starts getting in place. But it's the biggest single step in Alexander's life, I would say, you know, of his independence, because now he can just meet his friends on Princess Street.
Lovely, thank you, Claire. I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off. It's just that I've got one eye at a time, and we've got something that I'd really like all three of you to have a view on, if that's possible. It's someone who's put something in the chat to say, as a parent of a soon-to-be 16-year-old daughter in special school education, what advice would you give us for beginning to look at the options that might be available to her in the future? We haven't got very much time. It's going to have to be 1 or 2 sentences each. But for somebody, how do you find value? How do you find purpose? How do you start talking to somebody about the options that they have coming up? Let's see, Claire. I will come to you first, if that's okay, since I had to cut you off just there.
Yeah, so just do your research. For me, it was looking at universities, seeing the accessibility of them and what was available to me. But yeah, just seeing what your options are online, maybe photo strips on Facebook, social media. The internet is extremely helpful, I feel.
Julie, can I come to you again?
Yeah, I would say, what did your young person like doing? What did they enjoy doing? And then look, so is there something along those lines? Is there a pathway there? And I think as well, it's really important to say to them, you know what, there is no right or wrong. They may decide that, you know, they want to go down one avenue, and it's okay to change to something else. But I think, you know, at recent, you know, what do you enjoy doing? Because if you enjoy doing it and there's a pathway there and it's something you want to try out, then explore that. Because sometimes people can choose things that the young person doesn't. They choose because they think that's what the young person will like, and it can lead to failure rather than success.
So thank you. And Dave, you get the chance to round this off. And I'm thinking about you because it's a person-centered planning process. So
Yeah.
what would you say to this one?
Obviously, I'd be favor of a person-centered plan or a big plan to that person to work out what they want to do in life. And then we had, the school had some issues in all this, but they had a brilliant careers advisor. And she was amazingly helpful and realized that we were going to do something different. But again, Alexander did a few pathway courses, one in art, one in drama. He felt they were a bit dubbing, there was too much dubbing down of the content, but it did allow him to get that step into from school to college.
Lovely, thank you. So it's about listening to your young person, isn't it? And about, as you
Yeah.
said, Julie, finding out what they're passionate about, going with their interests and working with that. Right, we're going to have to call a halt there because we're coming up to the last session. There's going to be a short, well, is there a break now, or are we just going beyond into the final closing remarks? I think we can probably do that. But I would like to say before we do that, a huge thank you, Julie, for your contribution just there, Dave as well, and Claire, you too. It's been lovely to have you join us. It's been great if you could have been here in person, but never mind, it's been fantastic. Thank you very much.